Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to talk to you very briefly about investment governance in Southern Africa. For those of you who don't know, globally, investment governance has become quite a hot topic lately. The main question that frames a lot of the contemporary debates around investment governance is how, if at all, investment governance regimes, prevailing investment governance regimes, investment governance regimes can be made more compatible with sustainable development. Now, a little bit of background, if you'll allow. There is no overarching multilateral framework for the governance of foreign direct investment, unlike, for instance, there is in the area of international trade. Instead, FDI, foreign direct investment, is largely governed by a network of over 3,000 bilateral investment treaties. Now, this is true for Southern African region as well. Every single member state of SADC is party to at least one, and in most cases many more, bilateral investment treaties. These treaties, or BITs, is another acronym for you, are essentially agreements between two states that guarantees certain rights for investors from one of the states, or from each of the states, in respect of their investments in the territory of the other state. These rights typically include the right to fair and equitable treatment, which is understood as a protection against unfair discrimination, the right to full market value compensation if and when investments are expropriated, and possibly most controversially, the right to take investment disputes against a host government to international arbitration. Recently, there have been a number of developments. I'll name just two. The first is a proliferation of these investor-state dispute settlement arbitrations. The second is the initiation of particular highly controversial disputes touching on issues such as public health. One thinks, for example, of the current dispute initiated by the tobacco company Philip Morris, their Asian subsidiary, in fact, against the government of Australia, following that country's introduction of a plain packaging, regulations for cigarettes. These trends, these developments, have contributed to calls for reform of the global investment governance regime and have generated significant debates about the appropriateness of BITs and of investor-state dispute settlement. Now, South Africa is very much at the forefront of this debate. Between 2008 and 2010, the South African government undertook a comprehensive review of its own bilateral investment treaties and found, amongst other things, that these treaties contained a number of provisions that were inconsistent with South Africa's own constitution, that these BITs contained sections and provisions that were somewhat vague and somewhat ambiguous, which created some level of uncertainty both for investors and for the government, and that overall these BITs biased the interests of investors over concerns of public policy. In light of these findings, the South African government began cancelling some of its investment treaties, and late last year introduced the draft Promotion and Protection of Investment Bill, the PPI Bill. This piece of domestic legislation will effectively replace South Africa's BITs, once it becomes law, as the governance framework for all investment in South Africa, both local and foreign investment. Now, there are a number of reasons why South Africa's overhaul of its own investment governance regime is interesting, but I'm not going to go into those. Save for one. From a regional point of view, it is interesting because it seems to signal what appears, at least to me, to be a shifting approach to investment governance within the region as a whole. Why do I say that? Well, if we look at the PPI Bill, we see that the provisions contained therein are somewhat inconsistent with the provisions contained in SADC's Finance and Investment Protocol, and in particular in Annex 1 to the SADC FIP, which is sometimes called the Investment Annex. For example, the investment annex provides for all foreign investors in the SADC region it guarantees them the right to take disputes against host governments, host states, to international arbitration. South Africa's PPI Bill, on the other hand, seems to expressly omit recourse to international arbitration. Certainly if you know the government's stated opinions on investor-state dispute settlement, it seems that this was a very deliberate move. Clearly, however, the South African government is not going to be happy with the fact that this regional instrument, the FIP, and in particular its investment annex, provides a possible loophole for investors in South Africa to actually take the South African government to international arbitration if and when disputes arise. It would not be surprising, therefore, to see the South African government push for a renegotiation of the FIP, or at least its investment annex, if indeed it isn't doing that already. Secondly, in 2012, the SADC member states jointly, or at least a significant group of them, developed the Sadek Model Bit. Now, this is effectively a template that provides SADC member states with a menu of options to use in drawing up their own model bits or when negotiating future bilateral investment treaties. Now, although this template attempts to provide a wide range of menu items, of menu options, it certainly recommends a number of deviations from the standard provisions found in BITs globally and from the typical BITs provisions found in the BITs entered into by Southern African countries. It also reflects a deviation from many of the provisions found in, again, the FIP's investment annex. So clearly, the SADC model bit may also reflect the first stages of this evolution of a regional change in thinking on investment governance. Now, this short story is not going to conclude with any suggestions as to how a new investment governance framework should look in the region. I'm not going to recommend which particular provisions should be included and which should be excluded. All I really want to do with this presentation is to flag investment governance as an issue which I think is going to be squarely on the integration agenda, at least within SADC, in the short to medium term future, and possibly in other regions within Africa as well, perhaps the EAC, for example. I would like to conclude by just making 3 points which I think are relevant to this issue. The first is that this rethink and overhaul of investment governance is not particular to the Southern African region. As I've already alluded to, there is this global shift in thinking about the appropriateness of particular instruments of investment governance and the regime as a whole. We should therefore be careful not to fall into the trap of assuming that when a particular Southern African country decides that it wants to overhaul its national investment protection, investment governance regime, that this reflects growing anti-investor sentiment, or that this necessarily or simply reflects growing anti-investor sentiment. However, secondly, governments in the region must recognize that there is a potential trade-off inherent in seeking to limit the rights of foreign investors so as to preserve domestic policy space, and must consider very carefully whether steps taken in this regard are actually in the interest of their economies and of their polities. Finally, a hypothetical renegotiation of the FIP or its investment annex, or indeed the creation of a completely new investment governance framework for SADC, provides a valuable opportunity not only to incorporate new thinking on investment governance, but also to address many of the shortcomings currently found in the FIP's investment annex. In particular, it would be incredibly useful if this opportunity could be used to develop a rules-based dispensation which, on the one hand, promoted SADC as a transparent and attractive area for investment, for foreign investment, but on the other, which also served as a mechanism for convergence of national investment governance frameworks within the region, thereby creating a coherent regional investment area. Thank you.